Flashing blue lights in the dead of night usually signal trouble, but for one respected superior court magistrate, they signaled the beginning of a nightmare that would expose a rotten core in the local police department. What happens when an arrogant patrolman aggressively profiles a man pumping gas, completely unaware that he is slapping handcuffs on one of the most powerful legal figures in the state? This one catastrophic mistake didn't just ruin a career, it cost the city $15 million. Rain slicked the asphalt of Route 119, reflecting the neon glow of street lamps like shattered glass across the deserted highway. Honorable Gregory Hayes rubbed his temples with a heavily calloused thumb, feeling the profound, bone-deep exhaustion of a 3-week homicide trial settling into his shoulders. At 58 years old, Gregory had spent over 3 decades navigating the treacherous waters of the criminal justice system. He had started as a razor-sharp public defender, clawed his way up to a prominent district attorney position, and finally earned his seat on the Superior Court bench for Mercer County. He was a man deeply acquainted with high stakes, violent criminals, and the heavy burden of deciding a person's ultimate fate. But tonight, he was not a judge. He was just a weary man who desperately wanted to go home. He had shed his heavy black judicial robe hours ago, tossing his tailored suit jacket and silk tie onto the passenger seat of his silver Mercedes-Benz S580, now dressed in a simple, dark grey crewneck sweater and pressed slacks. Gregory drove through the affluent, quiet borders of Westbridge. His grand, colonial-style suburban home was only 4 miles away, promising a hot shower and the comfort of his own bed. However, a sharp chime from his dashboard interrupted his thoughts. The yellow fuel warning light glared brightly from the digital console. Sighing heavily, Gregory activated his turn signal and pulled into the brightly lit Chevron station on the corner of Elm Street and Ridge Boulevard, parking parallel to pump number 4. The station was entirely empty, bathed in the harsh, sterile glow of fluorescent canopy lights. Hidden in the suffocating shadows of an abandoned strip mall across the intersection, a Westbridge Police Department cruiser sat idling. Behind the wheel was Officer Rick Dawson. A 15-year veteran of the force, Dawson was a man who had built a controversial reputation. He was known among his peers for his aggressive, hard-nosed tactics, and notoriously known among the city's minority residents for his relentless, unwarranted scrutiny. Dawson carried a heavy chip on his shoulder, viewing the wealthy, manicured streets of Westbridge as his personal kingdom. He took immense, twisted pride in aggressively rooting out anyone he deemed an outsider. Beside him, in the cramped cruiser, sat Officer Tyler Bennett, a fresh-faced rookie barely 3 months out of the police academy. Bennett was nervous, eager to please, and entirely dependent on his veteran training officer's approval to pass his probationary period. Dawson's eyes, narrowed and predatory, locked instantly onto the gleaming silver Mercedes across the street. He watched intently as a tall, broad-shouldered black man stepped out of the driver's side door. Dawson's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering furiously in his cheek. In Dawson's deeply prejudiced mind, a late-model, 6-figure luxury car parked in this specific zip code at midnight, driven by a black man in casual clothing, was an immediate, undeniable red flag. He did not see a fatigued, brilliant legal scholar stopping for a mundane errand. He only saw a target that needed to be neutralized. "Look at this guy," Dawson muttered, his voice dripping with instant suspicion as he shifted the heavy cruiser into drive. "Doesn't belong anywhere near here." Bennett blinked, sitting up straighter in the passenger seat and squinting through the rain-streaked windshield. "It's just a guy getting gas, Rick. The car doesn't look stolen. There's no broken glass, no erratic driving. You don't know this neighborhood yet, Tyler. You haven't developed the instinct," Dawson snapped, his tone laced with absolute, unwarranted authority. People who look like that, driving cars like that around here, 9 times out of 10, it's drug money, or the ride is hot. I'm running the plates. Dawson forcefully punched the alphanumeric sequence of the Mercedes into his mobile data terminal. The glowing screen flickered, a small spinning wheel mocking his impatience as the system queried the state database. Had Dawson waited just 10 more seconds, the screen would have populated with a glaring red banner indicating VIP status, clearly displaying that the vehicle belonged to Honorable Gregory Hayes, complete with judicial security protections. But patience was never Dawson's strong suit, and his bias had already made the ruling. Instead of waiting for the confirmation, Dawson decided to force a confrontation. He forcefully slapped the switch for the roof lights. The red and blue strobes violently shattered the quiet night, casting chaotic, dancing shadows across the wet pavement. Dawson slammed his foot on the accelerator, sending the cruiser surging across the empty intersection. He pulled into the Chevron station at a reckless, aggressive angle, slamming on the brakes so hard the cruiser's nose dipped sharply. He parked diagonally, completely boxing in the Mercedes and trapping it against the concrete fuel pump island. Gregory was in the middle of authorizing his credit card at the pump when the aggressive glare of the police strobes washed over him. He paused, the heavy rubber fuel nozzle gripped loosely in his right hand, and turned his head slowly. He felt a familiar, weary tightness constrict his chest. In his nearly 60 years of life, 30 of them spent deeply embedded in the law, he knew exactly what this interaction was. His prestigious title, his extensive education, and his impeccable record did not shield him from the harsh reality of his skin color in certain neighborhoods. Dawson kicked his door open with excessive force, stepping out into the cold air with his right hand resting menacingly on the textured grip of his holstered service weapon. "Step away from the vehicle," he barked, his abrasive voice echoing loudly off the metal canopy overhead. Gregory remained perfectly still, a stark contrast to the officer's manic energy. He deliberately kept his hands completely visible, his posture relaxed but commanding. With slow, highly measured movements, he placed the fuel nozzle back into its plastic cradle on the pump. "Officer, is there a problem here?" His deep, resonant baritone voice carried through the rain. It was the exact same, unwavering voice that routinely commanded absolute silence in a packed, chaotic courtroom. Tonight, however, that calm authority only seemed to pour gasoline on the patrolman's irrational anger. "I said step away from the car, and keep your hands where I can see them," Dawson shouted, closing the distance rapidly, his boots splashing heavily in the shallow puddles. Bennett trailed closely behind him, his hand nervously hovering near his radio, his face pale and visibly uncomfortable. "My hands are plainly visible, officer," Gregory replied softly, taking exactly one calculated step backward to create a buffer of space. "I am simply purchasing fuel on my way home to my residence. What is your reasonable, articulable suspicion for this detention?" The sudden use of precise legal terminology hit Dawson like a physical blow, momentarily short-circuiting his aggressive momentum. Street criminals did not use phrases like articulable suspicion, but Dawson's fragile ego quickly overrode whatever small sense of caution the rookie partner might have felt. "Don't you dare play roadside lawyer with me, pal. I am the one who asks the questions out here," Dawson sneered, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson in the flashing blue light. "Let me see your driver's license, your vehicle registration, and your proof of insurance. Right now." "I have absolutely no legal obligation to provide you with my identification unless you suspect me of committing a crime," Gregory stated, his tone remaining infuriatingly steady and polite. "Since I am not actively operating the vehicle on a public roadway at this exact moment, and you have failed to articulate any lawful suspicion of criminal activity. This is merely a consensual encounter. An encounter which I am choosing to terminate right now." Dawson felt a surge of pure, unfiltered rage. The absolute defiance, cloaked in such perfect, unshakable legal articulation, completely shattered his illusion of total street control. "Listen to me very carefully," Dawson hissed, unsnapping the leather retention strap on his duty belt and violently yanking a pair of steel handcuffs from his pouch. "You match the exact physical description of a suspect involved in a massive string of high-end auto thefts in this county. You are going to give me your ID, or you are going face first onto the concrete." It was a blatant, fabricated lie. There had been no such string of luxury car thefts in Mercer County in over a year, and Gregory, who signed the arrest warrants and reviewed the local dockets daily, knew this for an absolute fact. The tension in the autumn air thickened until it was suffocating. The blue and red strobes flashed a frantic, chaotic rhythm across the faces of the three men. The rookie, Tyler Bennett, swallowed hard, a terrible, sinking feeling in his gut, whispering frantically that this situation was spiraling dangerously out of control. "Officer Bennett, is it?" Gregory suddenly shifted his gaze to the young rookie, reading the silver nameplate pinned to the young man's chest. "I highly suggest you activate your body-worn camera immediately, if it is not already recording. Your training officer is about to commit a gross violation of my Fourth Amendment rights, and you do not want to be legally culpable for failure to intervene." Bennett froze, his eyes darting frantically between the imposing black man standing casually by the pump and his seething training officer. Instinctively, Bennett's hand twitched toward the square camera mounted in the center of his chest, double-tapping the button. A soft, double beep confirmed the device was now capturing audio and video. Hearing the beep, Dawson lost the last shred of his restraint. "That's it. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're being detained for obstruction of justice." Dawson lunged forward, aggressively grabbing Gregory's left wrist and attempting to twist his arm behind his back. Gregory did not throw a punch, nor did he violently resist, but he firmly planted his feet, flexing his broad shoulders to prevent his arm from being unnaturally bent. "Do not lay your hands on me," Gregory warned, his voice finally rising in volume, dropping the polite facade to reveal the thunderous authority of a judge. "You are making a catastrophic mistake. I demand that you call a shift supervisor to this location immediately." "I am the only supervisor you need to worry about right now," Dawson snarled, using his body weight to shove Gregory forward. Gregory's chest bumped against the cold, wet side of his own Mercedes. With brutish force, Dawson wrenched Gregory's arms backward, snapping the cold steel cuffs securely around his wrists. The metallic clicks echoed loudly in the quiet night, sealing Dawson's fate. "Check his pockets," Dawson ordered the rookie, breathing heavily as he pressed his forearm into the center of Gregory's back to hold him against the car. "Find his wallet. Let's see who this smart mouth really is." Bennett approached hesitantly, his hands visibly shaking. "Sir, I'm going to reach into your back pocket now," the rookie stammered apologetically. "Proceed, Officer Bennett," Gregory said calmly, his cheek resting against the cold window of his car. "Take out the wallet. Open it. Look at the gold shield pinned to the left flap." Bennett slipped his hand into Gregory's pocket and retrieved a smooth, worn leather bifold. The rookie flipped it open under the glare of the canopy lights. His eyes went wide, his jaw dropping slightly as the breath caught in his throat. Pinned to the leather was a heavy, gleaming gold shield. Below it was a state-issued identification card bearing the official seal of Mercer County. Honorable Gregory Hayes, Superior Court Judge, 1st Judicial District. Bennett's hands trembled violently. He looked up, his face drained of all color, staring at Dawson in sheer, unadulterated horror. "Rick," Bennett whispered, his voice cracking. "Rick, let him go, right now. Take the cuffs off." "What? Why, who the hell is he?" Dawson barked, snatching the wallet from the rookie's trembling hands. Dawson stared at the gold badge. He stared at the ID. The gears in his mind ground to a violent halt, but his deeply ingrained prejudice refused to accept reality. Cognitive dissonance took over. Rather than admit the colossal, career-ending error he had just committed, Dawson doubled down on his ignorance. "This is a fake," Dawson laughed, a harsh, nervous sound that betrayed his internal panic. He waved the ID in front of Gregory's face. "Where did you steal this, huh? You expect me to believe a guy like you is a superior court judge? You're going away for a long time for impersonating a public official." Gregory slowly turned his head to look directly into Dawson's eyes. There was no fear in the judge's expression, only a profound, freezing pity mixed with judicial wrath. "Officer Dawson," Gregory said softly, ensuring every single syllable was perfectly captured by the rookie's microphone. "By this time tomorrow, you will not have a badge. By next week, you will not have a pension. And by next year, you will be the defendant sitting in my courthouse. Call your sergeant. Now." Rain hammered against the metal canopy of the Chevron station, the rhythmic drumming doing nothing to drown out the heavy, suffocating tension. Officer Rick Dawson stood his ground, gripping the gold shield in his wet fist, his mind frantically building a fortress of denial. He had cornered himself, and rather than admit defeat, he chose sheer, blinding arrogance. Officer Tyler Bennett, however, was already drowning in panic. While Dawson continued to berate the handcuffed judge, Bennett slowly backed away, his hand sliding down to the remote microphone clipped to his epaulette. Shielding his mouth from Dawson's line of sight, Bennett pressed the transmit button. "Dispatch, Unit 41. I need a patrol supervisor to my location immediately." "Code 3, Bennett whispered frantically, his voice trembling over the encrypted radio channel. "Unit 41, copy. Sergeant Carter is en route. ETA 3 minutes. The dispatcher's calm voice crackled back through the earpiece. Dawson snapped his head around, his eyes burning with fury. "Who the hell are you calling, rookie? I have this scene completely under control." "I'm following protocol, Rick," Bennett stammered, stepping further away from the Mercedes. "He asked for a supervisor. We have to call a supervisor." "He doesn't get to dictate protocol. He's a suspect," Dawson roared, pointing a thick finger at Gregory. Gregory Hayes leaned against his vehicle, his wrists aching against the cold steel of the handcuffs. But his demeanor remained terrifyingly calm. He watched Dawson self-destruct with the detached, analytical eye of a man who had sentenced murderers to life in prison without batting an eye. Every second Dawson kept him in restraints. The civil rights violations multiplied exponentially. The liability meter for the city of Westbridge was spinning out of control. Minutes later, the wail of a siren pierced the stormy night. A black Ford Explorer Interceptor tore into the gas station parking lot, its tires hydroplaning slightly before coming to a screeching halt directly behind Dawson's cruiser. The door flew open, and Sergeant William Carter stepped out into the downpour. Carter was a 20-year veteran, a pragmatic, level-headed officer who had spent the last 5 years trying to weed out the aggressive cowboys in his precinct. "What the hell is going on here, Dawson?" Carter bellowed, striding purposefully toward the fuel pumps. "Why are we locking down a gas station at midnight?" Dawson puffed out his chest, stepping forward to intercept his sergeant. "Got a live one here, Sarge. Matched the description of the high-end auto theft ring. Refused to provide identification. Combative. I found a fake badge in his pocket. He's claiming to be a superior court judge. I'm taking him in for impersonating an official and obstruction." Carter frowned, water dripping from the brim of his uniform cap. He pushed past Dawson, his eyes landing on the tall, dignified black man handcuffed against the silver Mercedes. Carter's heart completely stopped in his chest. The blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him pale and horrified under the harsh fluorescent lights. Carter knew exactly who this man was. Just 3 weeks prior, Carter had sat in the witness stand in courtroom 4B, testifying in a high-profile armed robbery case. He had looked up at the towering mahogany bench and answered questions directed by the incredibly sharp, commanding intellect of Honorable Gregory Hayes. "Oh my God," Carter breathed, the words barely escaping his lips. "See? Told you," Dawson smirked, completely misinterpreting his sergeant's horror. "Guy's a total fraud. Shut your mouth, Dawson. Shut your damn mouth right now," Carter snarled, a terrifying quiet fury replacing his initial shock. He shoved Dawson aside with enough force to make the patrolman stumble, sprinting the final few feet to the Mercedes. Carter's hands shook as he fumbled for his handcuff keys. "Your Honor, Judge Hayes, I am so incredibly sorry. I have no words for this." Dawson's jaw dropped. The smirk vanished, replaced by a sickening wave of pure terror. "Wait, Sarge, you know this guy. He's actually—" "I told you to shut up!" Carter roared, his voice echoing loudly across the empty intersection. He swiftly unlocked the cuffs, tossing the heavy steel bracelets onto the wet concrete with a sharp clatter. "Judge, please, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Gregory slowly brought his arms forward, rubbing the deep red indentations on his wrists. He straightened his posture, towering over the sergeant. He did not yell. He did not swear. His voice was a cold, lethal whisper that sent shivers down Carter's spine. "I am physically unharmed, Sergeant Carter," Gregory said, his piercing gaze shifting from the sergeant to the trembling rookie, and finally resting on the paralyzed form of Rick Dawson. "However, I have just been subjected to an illegal detainment, an unlawful search, and a false arrest without a shred of probable cause, entirely fueled by blatant racial profiling. Your officer fabricated a criminal suspicion to justify his bias. Your Honor, I swear to you this will be handled," Carter pleaded, desperate to de-escalate the catastrophic situation. "I will personally suspend him tonight. This is completely unacceptable." "Handled?" Gregory repeated the word as if tasting something utterly foul. "Yes, Sergeant, it will absolutely be handled, but not by your internal precinct politics. You are a good man, Carter, but your department has fostered a culture of toxicity that allows men like Officer Dawson to terrorize citizens." Gregory reached out and retrieved his wallet and his gold shield from Dawson's frozen, unresisting hand. He smoothly slid them back into his pocket, never breaking eye contact with the patrolman. "Officer Dawson," Gregory said, his voice ringing with absolute, final judgment. "You thought you pulled over a victim tonight. You thought you could exercise your petty authority in the shadows where no one would see. But you pulled over the one man who knows exactly how to dismantle every single defense your union will try to build. I will see you in federal court." Without another word, Gregory Hayes opened the door of his Mercedes, slid into the luxurious leather seat, started the engine, and drove away into the night, leaving 3 police officers standing in the rain, fully aware that a legal hurricane was about to make landfall. Morning sunlight pierced through the towering glass windows of the Walsh & Associates law firm, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished mahogany conference table. Attorney Rebecca Walsh, a formidable force in civil rights litigation with a reputation for ruthlessly bankrupting corrupt municipalities, sat at the head of the table. Across from her sat Gregory Hayes, dressed in a sharp, immaculate navy pinstripe suit, looking entirely unfazed by the ordeal of the previous night. The red bruising around his wrists was neatly concealed beneath the crisp, white French cuffs of his tailored shirt. "They are already panicking, Gregory," Rebecca said, sliding a thick, freshly printed dossier across the table. "My paralegals pulled Officer Rick Dawson's complete internal affairs file this morning. It took some serious leveraging, but We got it before the precinct could accidentally misplace the records. Gregory opened the file, his eyes scanning the densely packed pages with the practiced efficiency of a veteran judge. 14 prior complaints, he noted, his voice devoid of surprise but heavy with disgust. 14 separate citizens filed formal complaints against Dawson for racial profiling, excessive force, and unlawful detention over the last 7 years, and every single one of them was investigated internally and dismissed as unfounded by the department, Rebecca added, leaning forward, her eyes gleaming with the predatory thrill of an unwinnable case suddenly falling into her lap. The city of Westbridge knew exactly what kind of officer he was. They protected him. They shielded him from accountability. This isn't just about one bad apple on a rainy Tuesday night. This is a systemic, documented pattern of negligence by the city's leadership. We have them on negligent retention, failure to train, and blatant violation of your Fourth Amendment rights. Meanwhile, exactly 4 miles away in the heavily fortified downtown police headquarters, absolute chaos reigned supreme. Chief of Police Bradley Fowler was pacing furiously behind his desk, his face a mottled, unhealthy shade of purple. The heavy oak door to his office was locked, but the shouting inside could be heard all the way down the administrative hallway. How does a 15-year veteran mistake a sitting Superior Court judge for a car thief? Chief Fowler screamed, slamming his fist onto his desk so hard his coffee mug rattled. Explain to me how we put handcuffs on the man who single-handedly approves half of our department's search warrants. Lieutenant Greg Henderson from Internal Affairs stood rigidly at attention, sweating profusely under his stiff collar. Chief, it's worse than just the arrest. We reviewed the body cam footage this morning. Fowler stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing defensively. What did Dawson say on the tape? Did he drop any slurs? Give me the damage assessment. Dawson didn't say anything on his tape, sir, because Dawson didn't have his camera turned on, Henderson explained, wincing slightly as he prepared to deliver the killing blow. When Sergeant Carter arrived on the scene and Dawson realized who he had in cuffs, Dawson secretly powered down his body camera and attempted to wipe the local memory drive on his dash cam. Fowler groaned, burying his face in his hands. Spoliation of evidence. It's a federal crime. He just handed them a golden ticket to a jury. It gets worse, Chief, Henderson continued, his voice barely a whisper. The rookie, Officer Bennett. The judge told him to turn his camera on right before Dawson got physical. Bennett followed the order. His camera captured everything in crystal clear, high-definition video and audio. The illegal commands, the fabricated probable cause, the physical assault, Dawson ignoring the badge, everything. And Bennett's camera automatically uploads to the county cloud server the moment it hits the charging dock. We can't bury it. It's permanently logged. Chief Fowler sank slowly into his leather chair, the weight of the situation crushing the breath from his lungs. He knew attorney Rebecca Walsh. He knew she would file an emergency preservation order by noon and a federal civil rights lawsuit by Friday. Have you spoken to the mayor's office? Fowler asked, his voice suddenly hollow, stripped of all its previous anger. The city attorney called 5 minutes before you arrived, Chief, Henderson replied grimly. They received a notice of intent to sue from Walsh and Associates. They are demanding $15 million in damages, the immediate termination of Officer Dawson, and a complete federal oversight audit of our police department's Internal Affairs Division. If we don't agree to negotiate the settlement by Monday, they are releasing Bennett's body cam footage to every major news network in the country. Fowler closed his eyes, visualizing the inevitable media circus. He saw the protests, the press conferences, the endless loops of his officer brutalizing a beloved, respected black judge on national television. Back at the law firm, Rebecca Walsh took a sip of her black coffee and smiled sharply at Gregory. They will try to settle quietly, Gregory. They always do. They will offer a few million and ask for a non-disclosure agreement to protect their precious department's reputation. Gregory closed the thick dossier and folded his hands carefully on the mahogany table. The exhaustion from the night before had completely vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. He wasn't just a victim. He was an instrument of the law, and the law demanded a reckoning. "There will be no quiet settlement, Rebecca," Gregory said firmly, his baritone voice echoing with absolute finality. "This is not about money. The money is simply the only language the city's insurance carriers understand. This is about ensuring that Rick Dawson never wears a badge again. It is about ensuring that the next young man he pulls over in the dark doesn't end up a tragic headline. We are taking this to trial, and we are going to expose everything. Federal litigation generally moves at a glacial pace, but the sheer gravity of Honorable Gregory Hayes's lawsuit sent shockwaves through the municipal infrastructure of Westbridge with unprecedented speed. By filing a massive civil rights deprivation claim under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, attorney Rebecca Walsh bypassed the local courts entirely, dragging the city's dirty laundry directly into the unforgiving spotlight of the federal judiciary. The city council's initial reaction was typical political hubris: deny, delay, and attempt to discredit. They hired Jonathan Pierce, a notoriously aggressive defense attorney whose primary tactic was dragging out discovery until plaintiffs simply ran out of money. But Gregory Hayes was not a vulnerable citizen terrified of legal bills. He was a master of the courtroom who had spent 3 decades mastering the very rules Pierce was attempting to exploit. Lexington Insurance Company, the real-world massive corporate underwriter holding the municipal liability policy for the Westbridge Police Department, immediately flagged the case as a catastrophic risk. Their elite risk assessment actuaries ran the numbers and came to a terrifying conclusion. If this went to a jury, the punitive damages could bankrupt the city's emergency reserve funds. They pressured Mayor Richard Hughes to settle quickly, but Rebecca Walsh flatly refused every single confidential offer that slid across her mahogany desk. $3 million, $5 million, $8 million. She rejected them all with single-sentence letters, demanding a public trial and the absolute, irrevocable termination of Officer Rick Dawson. Discovery proved to be an absolute bloodbath for the defense. During the mandatory exchange of evidence, Walsh subpoenaed the proprietary metadata from Axon Enterprise, the private technology corporation that manufactured the police department's body cameras. The digital forensic logs proved undeniably that Dawson had manually reached up and terminated his recording device exactly 7 seconds after seeing the judge's gold shield, actively attempting to destroy evidence of his own civil rights violations. The true devastation, however, unfolded during the videotaped depositions held in the austere conference rooms of Walsh and Associates. Tyler Bennett, the terrified rookie, was the first to be sworn in. Stripped of his uniform and wearing an ill-fitting grey suit, Bennett looked like a frightened child facing a firing squad. Under oath, with his own personal lawyer sitting rigidly beside him, Bennett broke rank completely. He testified for 4 agonizing hours, detailing how Dawson specifically targeted the silver Mercedes-Benz solely based on the driver's race, entirely fabricating the high-end auto theft ring. Narrative. Bennett wept openly on the record, apologizing to the empty chair where Gregory would normally sit, admitting that Dawson frequently boasted about using traffic stops to keep the neighborhood clean of minorities. 2 weeks later, Rick Dawson walked into the same conference room for his deposition. The arrogant, swaggering patrolman who had strutted across the rainy Chevron station was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, sweating shell of a man. Jonathan Pierce sat next to him, constantly objecting to Rebecca Walsh's surgical, relentless questioning. But the objections were useless to stop the bleeding. "Officer Dawson," Walsh began, her voice a deadly, quiet purr as she slid an 8x10 glossy photograph across the table. It was a still frame from Bennett's body camera, showing Dawson aggressively twisting the judge's arm. "At this exact timestamp, 0 to 14:32, you initiated violent physical contact with my client. What specific, articulable crime did you suspect he had committed at this exact second?" Dawson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "He was resisting a lawful order. I ordered him to provide identification." "Is it a crime in this state to refuse identification during a consensual encounter, Officer Dawson?" Walsh asked, leaning forward, her eyes locking onto his with predatory focus. "I believed it was an investigative detention," Dawson stammered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Based on what evidence?" Walsh snapped back instantly. "Officer Bennett testified under oath yesterday that there were 0 reports of stolen luxury vehicles matching that description anywhere in Mercer County for the past 12 months. Did you invent that probable cause, Officer Dawson?" Pierce slammed his hand on the table. "Objection! Badgering the witness! Don't answer that, Rick." "He will answer it, Mr. Pierce, or I will file a motion to compel with the federal magistrate before lunch, and you can explain to him why your client is committing perjury." Walsh fired back, completely unfazed. Dawson's hands shook as he reached for a glass of water, spilling a few drops onto the polished wood. For the next 6 hours, Walsh methodically dismantled every single excuse, every fabricated narrative, and every thin veil of police procedure Dawson attempted to hide behind. She forced him to read aloud from his own department's internal policy manual, contrasting the official guidelines directly with his recorded actions on the night of the incident. She brought out the 14 previous complaints against him, forcing him to look at the faces of the citizens he had previously harassed. By the time the deposition concluded, Dawson was staring blankly at the wall, completely broken, his career essentially dead on arrival. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the police union dug their heels in. They refused to allow the city to fire Dawson without a lengthy, convoluted arbitration process, betting arrogantly that a jury would never award the full $15 million. They believed that no matter how bad the video looked, the general public would inherently side with law enforcement. It was a fatal, arrogant miscalculation that would ultimately serve as the final nail in the city's coffin. Gregory Hayes had patiently allowed the defense to trap themselves in a corner of their own making. The stage was finally set for the most explosive federal civil rights trial the state had seen in a decade. Heavy rhythmic gavel strikes echoed sharply through the cavernous expanse of the United States District Court, bringing the packed gallery to a dead, breathless silence. Honorable Patricia Higgins, a no-nonsense federal judge with zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, presided over the sprawling room from her elevated bench. Sunlight strained through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing above the overflowing spectator benches. Local news reporters, prominent civil rights activists, off-duty police officers, and eager law students were crammed shoulder to shoulder, desperate to witness a highly publicized legal showdown that threatened to dismantle a city's entire power structure. At the plaintiff's table, Gregory Hayes sat perfectly composed. His posture radiated a quiet, unshakable dignity, his hands folded neatly over a leather-bound legal pad. Beside him, attorney Rebecca Walsh stood at the wooden podium, arranging her notes with lethal precision, fully prepared to deliver an opening statement that would set the tone for the massacre. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Walsh began, her voice ringing clear, steady, and carrying a razor-sharp edge across the silent room. "Absolute power is a profoundly dangerous weapon when placed in the hands of a man who believes he is entirely immune to consequence. On the rain-swept night of October 12th, my client, a highly respected superior court judge, stopped his vehicle to purchase fuel after a grueling 3-week homicide trial. He was not speeding. He was not driving erratically. He was simply existing in a wealthy neighborhood while being a black man. And for that entirely legal, mundane act, Officer Rick Dawson decided to strip him of his dignity, his constitutional rights, and his freedom, utilizing a badge as a shield for his own unchecked bigotry. Over at the defense table, Jonathan Pierce scribbled furiously on a yellow legal pad, his face a tight mask of forced, brittle confidence. Next to him, Rick Dawson sat rigidly in an ill-fitting dark suit, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the oak table. Dawson stared fixedly at the American flag positioned behind the witness stand, entirely unwilling to make eye contact with the diverse jury box, observing his every twitch. Defense counsel will inevitably stand before you and claim this was merely a tragic misunderstanding, Walsh continued, pacing slowly, her heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor. They will tell you it was a dark, stormy night, and that Officer Dawson was just being proactive, trying to protect a vulnerable community from phantom criminals. But we will not ask you to simply take our word for what transpired. We are going to show you exactly how a sworn protector becomes a predator when he thinks the shadows will hide his sins. Litigation moved forward with ruthless, devastating efficiency. Walsh called her initial witnesses with surgical precision, rapidly establishing the impeccable moral character and unimpeachable legal standing of Judge Hayes. By the afternoon of the second day, she called Chief Bradley Fowler to the stand as a hostile witness. Under intense, suffocating cross-examination, Fowler sweated profusely under the bright courtroom lights. Walsh cornered him with his own departmental manuals, forcing the embattled chief to admit, on the permanent public record, that Dawson's actions completely violated every single training protocol the department had implemented. Worse still, Fowler's credibility completely crumbled when Walsh forced him to read aloud the staggering financial costs of the 14 previous confidential settlements, paid out entirely due to Dawson's historical misconduct. However, the true turning point of the trial, the exact moment that completely annihilated the defense's entire strategy, occurred on the morning of the third day. Walsh called Tyler Bennett to the stand. The young rookie had officially resigned from the Westbridge Police Department just the previous week, unable to endure the unbearable, daily retaliation orchestrated by the corrupt police union. Bennett took the solemn oath with a shaky, terrified voice, gripping the edges of the witness stand as if it were a life raft in a hurricane. "Mr. Bennett, I am directing your attention to the large, high-definition monitor facing the jury box," Walsh said, nodding to the court bailiff to dim the overhead lights. "The court has officially admitted Plaintiff's Exhibit A, the raw, unedited body camera footage recovered directly from your Axon device on the night in question. Let us watch it together." The massive screen flickered to life, plunging the courtroom into the grim reality of that fateful night. The footage was terrifyingly, undeniably clear. The heavy, relentless rain, the frantic flashing of blue and red strobes reflecting off the wet pavement. And then the audio kicked in. Dawson's arrogant, excessively aggressive voice boomed through the courtroom's premium surround sound system, sending chills down the spines of the jurors. "Don't you dare play roadside lawyer with me, pal. I am the one who asks the questions out here." Jurors watched in stunned, horrified silence as the video showed a remarkably calm, entirely compliant Judge Hayes being violently shoved against the wet steel of his own vehicle. They saw Dawson's face twisted in irrational, predatory rage. They heard the sickening metallic click of the steel handcuffs being maliciously forced onto the wrists of a man who had done absolutely nothing wrong. And then the camera captured the precise, defining moment. The rookie pulled the gleaming gold shield from the judge's leather wallet. The wide-angle lens clearly captured Dawson, staring directly at the undeniable proof of judicial authority. The sensitive microphone picked up his exact, sneering words, forever immortalized in digital memory. "This is a fake. Where did you steal this, huh?" A collective, audible gasp rippled forcefully through the jury box. One juror, a middle-aged woman sitting in the front row, actually covered her mouth with both hands in pure, unadulterated shock. It was one thing to hear about the incident in abstract, sterile legal terms. It was an entirely different, sickening universe of horror to watch a heavily armed agent of the state violently assault a calm, dignified, high-ranking judicial official on crystal-clear video. Walsh paused the video right on Dawson's sneering face, his expression frozen in a mask of ignorance and malice. The courtroom was so incredibly quiet you could hear the faint hum of the air-conditioning vents and the rapid breathing of the defendant. "Mr. Bennett," Walsh said softly, turning her sympathetic gaze back to the trembling witness. "Did my client, at any point during this 10-minute interaction, make a sudden movement, raise his voice, attempt to flee, or exhibit any signs of physical aggression?" "No, ma'am," Bennett whispered, wiping a stray tear from his eye with a trembling hand. He was perfectly calm, he was polite, he was just trying to go home. "And did Officer Dawson possess any legitimate, lawful, or articulable reason to place a sitting Superior Court judge in handcuffs that night?" "No, ma'am," Bennett replied, his voice breaking slightly under the immense, emotional weight of his admission. He just didn't like the way he looked." At the defense table, Jonathan Pierce slowly closed his eyes, releasing a long, defeated sigh before quietly lowering his expensive fountain pen onto his legal pad. It was unequivocally over. The video was a nuclear bomb dropped directly into the center of their defense, and Bennett's honest, heartbreaking testimony was the radioactive fallout. Lexington Insurance Company representatives, sitting rigidly in the back row, immediately stood up, buttoning their expensive suit jackets, and walked briskly out of the courtroom. They were already dialing their corporate headquarters in New York to officially authorize the catastrophic loss payout. They knew, with absolute certainty, that if this furious jury went to deliberation, $15 million was going to look like a miraculous bargain compared to the apocalyptic, punitive damages they were about to unleash. Courtroom proceedings on the fourth day felt less like a traditional legal battle and far more like a public execution waiting for the trapdoor to spring. Jonathan Pierce, the city's highly paid defense attorney, looked physically ill as he stood to cross-examine Honorable Gregory Hayes. Pierce knew that attempting to aggressively question a sitting judge with 3 decades of trial experience was akin to walking unarmed into a lion's den, but his contractual obligations demanded a final, desperate attempt to mitigate the catastrophic damage. He buttoned his suit jacket, cleared his throat loudly, and approached the wooden podium with hesitant steps. "Judge Hayes," Pierce began, his voice lacking its usual theatrical boom. "On the night in question, you admit that you refused to hand over your driver's license immediately upon request. Do you not believe that as a sworn officer of the court, you have a higher duty to cooperate seamlessly with law enforcement investigations?" Gregory leaned forward in the witness chair, his deep brown eyes locking onto Pierce with the focused intensity of a laser beam. The courtroom fell utterly silent, hanging on to every single breath he took. "Mr. Pierce, my duty as a sworn officer of the court is to uphold the United States Constitution," Gregory answered, his baritone voice carrying a profound, unwavering authority that made the defense attorney visibly flinch. The Fourth Amendment does not have a courtesy clause. It does not demand that a citizen waive their fundamental civil rights simply to appease the fragile ego of an armed public servant. Officer Dawson did not have an investigation. He had a prejudiced assumption. Compliance under the threat of unlawful violence is not cooperation. It is subjugation, and I will never subjugate the law to indulge a tyrant. A soft murmur of absolute agreement swept through the jury box. Pierce swallowed hard, realizing he had just handed the plaintiff the perfect soundbite for closing arguments. He asked 2 more inconsequential questions before retreating to his seat, thoroughly defeated. Rebecca Walsh's closing arguments were nothing short of a masterpiece in civil litigation. She systematically walked the jury through the timeline of the video, breaking down the financial cost of the police department's historical negligence, and finally pointing a sharp, manicured finger directly at Rick Dawson. She did not ask for a mere settlement. She demanded a reckoning. She explicitly asked the jury to award $15 million, not just to compensate Judge Hayes for his emotional distress, but to financially cripple the city's corrupt municipal infrastructure so severely that they would be forced to rebuild their police department from the ground up. When the jury retired to deliberate, the legal pundits in the gallery predicted a verdict might take days given the massive financial numbers involved. But the tension in the courthouse shattered entirely when the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a unanimous decision in exactly 42 minutes. A deliberation that short in a federal civil rights trial only meant one thing: complete, unmitigated devastation for the defense. As the jury filed back into their designated seats, a shocking twist unfolded quietly in the back of the courtroom. The heavy wooden double doors swung open, and 3 men wearing dark suits with gold FBI lapel pins slipped into the gallery. Special Agent William Foster, a veteran of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, stood silently with his arms crossed. The federal government had been closely monitoring the civil trial, and the explosive body camera footage had provided them with all the probable cause they needed for a separate criminal indictment. Honorable Patricia Higgins demanded absolute silence as she received the sealed envelope from the jury foreman. She unfolded the thick paper, her stern expression completely unreadable as she reviewed the verdict form. "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" Judge Higgins asked, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "We have, Your Honor," the foreman replied firmly. "On the count of unlawful detainment and false arrest under color of law, how do you find?" "We find the defendant, Officer Rick Dawson, and the city of Westbridge fully liable." "On the count of excessive use of force and battery?" "Fully liable, Your Honor." Judge Higgins read through the remaining counts, every single one landing like a physical blow against the defense table. Then came the final, devastating decree. "And what damages have you awarded to the plaintiff?" "Your Honor, we award $5 million in compensatory damages and $10 million in punitive damages for a total judgment of $15 million. Chaos erupted in the gallery. Reporters sprinted for the exit to file their breaking news alerts. Jonathan Pierce buried his face in his trembling hands, while Rick Dawson sat entirely paralyzed, his face a ghostly, sickly white. Gregory Hayes simply closed his eyes and let out a long, quiet exhale, his posture never wavering. He had weaponized the legal system to excise a tumor from his city, but the nightmare for Dawson was far from over. As the judge formally adjourned the court and banged her wooden gavel, Special Agent Foster bypassed the wooden barricade and marched directly toward the defense table. He pulled a federal arrest warrant from his breast pocket and slapped it down forcefully in front of the disgraced patrolman. "Rick Dawson, you are under arrest by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for the criminal deprivation of civil rights under color of law," Foster announced, his voice slicing through the lingering courtroom chatter. Federal agents forcefully grabbed Dawson's arms, pulling them behind his back and snapping cold steel handcuffs over his wrists. It was a poetic, brutal reversal of fate. The $15 million judgment completely bankrupted the city's corrupt internal affairs division, forcing a massive federal oversight mandate that completely restructured the police department. Chief Bradley Fowler was forced into early retirement, and the toxic police union was dismantled. But perhaps the most powerful image of the entire ordeal happened the very next morning. At exactly 8 o'clock, Honorable Gregory Hayes put on his heavy black judicial robe, walked into courtroom 4B, and calmly took his seat upon the elevated mahogany bench, continuing his lifelong pursuit of absolute justice. What an incredible true story of justice prevailing against systemic corruption and unhinged arrogance. Judge Gregory Hayes proved that absolutely nobody is above the law, especially those who take a sworn oath to uphold it. If this breathtaking courtroom drama kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. Share this video with your friends to help expose the abuse of power in our justice system. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of incredible legal battles. What would you have said to Officer Dawson at that gas station? Let us know in the comments section below.